Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi ki ngā mema o Global Women. Thank you to Agnes, Anna, Kate and our Global Women team. Kia ora tātou hoa, and to our sporting friends. So this is Global Women's first attempt at an online panel, and we appreciate your patience if there are any technical difficulties. There will be a Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. We will then facilitate the asking of 3 questions that will be led by each of our panellists. So to the kaupapa of today's hui, the future of sport for women and girls within this COVID-19 context. Obviously at the moment, level 4, there's not much sport and rec happening. And when we progress to levels 3, 2 and 1, obviously we're looking at the leadership of our national sporting organisations to develop guidelines with Sport New Zealand that will help us all participate in sport and recreation. So within this changing landscape and these changes in society, I guess what are the impacts for all of us in terms of how we play sport and recreation and how we watch sport and recreation? We have 3 amazing speakers with us today who will highlight these changes for sport generally, and some of them may speak specifically about certain codes, and with a focus on opportunities for women and girls. So our first speaker today is Kereyn Smith. Kereyn is the CEO and General Secretary of the New Zealand Olympic Committee, a role she has held since 2011, following more than 20 years in sport leadership roles. Kereyn has successfully delivered a new strategic direction for the New Zealand Olympic Committee and has overseen our successful campaigns for the London 2012 Olympic Games, Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games and the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. So Kereyn, I will hand over to you to talk about your role in sport and the challenges you are currently facing. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Louisa, and to friends and family from the Global Women community. It's really nice to be here this afternoon. I'm just checking my stability, not me, but my Wi-Fi seems to be juggling a little bit, so I'll keep close to the microphone. Yeah, Louisa, look, thank you for the opportunity to talk. It's sort of mind-blowing when you just try and think about the challenges. So I just thought I'd focus on a couple of areas in particular. Probably on reflection, one of the things that I've been thinking about is just how necessary it has been for us all to move with pace and purpose when you're in such a grey space. And for us in particular at the New Zealand Olympic Committee, our job is kind of like the meat in the sandwich. So we're kind of a connector between what happens on the global stage at Olympic and Commonwealth events and in the Olympic and Commonwealth community into our sports and athletes in New Zealand. And so we're in that middle space where you're kind of a connector and you're very much a projector and you're trying to distill information. And the particular challenges we've had is around the postponement of the Olympic Games, which were to take place in about 120 days time. And now we're going to be, more like 400. And Fiona's been sharing similar experiences. So for us, it's been very much about taking that information and thinking about how we respond to that. And the particular challenges there have been making sure we are very, very focused on our main purpose. And I talk to our team a lot about when you're under pressure and when you're in kind of decision-making or leadership roles where people depend on you for their information, you have to keep the main thing the main thing. So for us, it's very much about coming back to our job as a connector, keeping our athletes engaged and informed, working with influencers internationally and domestically, trying to make sure that our athletes get as much certainty as quickly as they possibly can and flowing that information forward and around about freely. And the other thing about that, and it's at a personal level I reflect on, and for sport, in these times our values become really important, and our values and our spirit to keep people inspired and motivated. And so I think one of the things we've been endeavouring to do as well is to make sure that we're playing our part in communicating with New Zealanders in an optimistic and positive sense. and working to tell the athletes stories that see them as resilient and ordinary average Kiwis doing their hard work, and making sure that we're all in a strong and active community. So I guess those are the kind of messages. And just finally from me, I think at a personal level as a leader, these things are very challenging, aren't they? Because you kind of got to be at the forefront and kind of exude some confidence and calmness and be grounded when all the world around you is a little bit swirling. And it's something that I've been focusing my attention on a lot personally, to make sure that athletes and sports have confidence in our leadership style, and they have confidence that we're listening, and we can provide for our own team and our own people a bit of a secure base. So just trying to create some certainty, trying to give some order, even though it's complicated. And for athletes, missing out on going to an Olympic Games is a significant thing. So for us, it's just about to make sense of all that and to step up in our leadership capabilities.
Thank you, Kereyn. So our second speaker this afternoon is Fiona Allan. Fiona is the Chief Executive and Secretary General of Paralympics New Zealand, a role she has held since 2007. Prior to this, Fiona has held extensive sport leadership positions within a variety of central and local government and not-for-profit organisations in the UK, Australia and New Zealand. Kia ora, Fiona.
Thank you, Louisa, and thank you to everyone that's joined the call today for your interest in the discussion. I thought it might be useful if I just quickly share some context relating to our organisation and how we operate within two key roles in New Zealand. The first is the National Paralympic Committee, so responsible for sending teams to the Paralympic Games and for advocating and educating all New Zealanders on the importance of including disabled people in sport, and whilst doing so helping change societal attitudes to those living in New Zealand with a disability. Second role that we also play is we're responsible for delivering high performance para sport programs. So those of para swimming, para cycling and shooting para sport. So we've got a number of program managers, contracted coaches, contracted athletes directly to Paralympics New Zealand within those para sports also that compete nationally and internationally at events in the lead up to the Paralympic Games. So we're in a dual role, and our membership comprises, like the New Zealand Olympic Committee, of the national sports organisations, but we also have regional parafed organisations that coordinate community, disability and para sport. So the challenges that I'm currently facing, both related to COVID-19 and the subsequent postponement of the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games to now into August 2021 in a similar manner as the Olympics, can be broken up into two main areas for me. One is ensuring and prioritising the well-being of our people, whilst also trying to prioritise myself, and currently also trying to be a teacher for my 7 and 6-year-old. And it's quite funny, really. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher, although I've learned over the past few weeks, as probably the best of everyone, that I didn't embark upon that as an occupation. So that's a good learning for me. And secondly, I'm reassessing my organisation's needs in the short, immediate, intermediate and longer term, and including in those the considerations of what a recovery may look like, not only for Paralympics New Zealand, but also in the context of the sports sector that we're now operating in as a whole. So if I delve into just those two areas, the first being our well-being of our people, ourselves and our families. From our para-athletes perspective, our para-athletes, like Kereyn and the Olympic athletes, are really resilient. And there's none other when there's changes that happen to you that you realise and need to harness that strength. And we're really seeing that amongst our para-athletes. For some, it's a real advantage that the Games are another year. However, for others, it's not. It wasn't in their plan. and now it's an additional year's commitment for them, and the same with our coaches that coach our para athletes. So at this time, we're really taking the time to consider and understand the impact upon their physical and mental well-being. Currently in lockdown, they're not used to be in lockdown and experiencing reduced movement. Their training regimes doesn't normally allow for that. And from a staff perspective, it's about listening, supporting and communicating regularly with them. From a members and commercial partners perspective, it's about further understanding their implications for their organisations and their people. And finally, but importantly for myself and my family, is seeking to schedule the days working from home and teaching from home to accommodate time for my family and myself. And it's only in this last week that I've taken my running back up. And I have to say I do and really love the value of having that time to myself. The second area was reassessing my organisation's needs in the short, immediate and longer term. So I'm currently looking at considering our organisation's capacity to resource, both from a staffing and investment perspective, 3 Paralympic Games in what's now a shortened 3-year period, 21, 22 and 24. A challenge I do have is providing my board with a 4-year forecast in an environment where there are still so many unknowns. So I practically removed all non-confirmed fundraising and gaming trust income out of the budget for the remainder of the year, and I'm considering now our ability to work with our commercial partners to still deliver on the partnership agreements that we have in place, albeit with having our Paralympic Games delayed a further year, and the real risks associated with not receiving any additional commercial revenues in 2021. What I've learned over the past few weeks is the real importance as a leader to be very transparent. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. There were a lot of answers not known, and it's being very honest and clear and authentic that you do not know that, but you will share the information in a very timely manner. And I've committed to do that in the best way that I can across all of our stakeholders. Again, like Kereyn's point, is distilling confidence in you as an individual, you across your team, and you across your greater teams of the people that you work with.
Thank you, Fiona. Our third speaker this afternoon is Dr. Farah Palmer. Farah is an Associate Dean and Senior Lecturer at Massey University Business School. She was also a member of the Black Ferns for 10 years, captain for 8 of those years, and in 2016 she became the first woman in 124 years to ever be appointed to the board of New Zealand Rugby as chair of the New Zealand Māori Rugby Board, and Farah was also my captain, and I'm very proud of her. So I'll hand over to you, Farah.
Kia ora Louisa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I'm very honoured to be here and invited by Global Women to be a part of this panel, and it's really lovely for me to hear the experiences and thoughts of both you, Kereyn and Fiona, because sometimes you do feel like, well, we all are in bubbles, but when you're kind of working at that leadership level and on a board, you can kind of feel like, does anyone else have these similar issues? And it's great to hear that. So that's been a positive that I didn't think I would get out of today, just hearing your stories. So thank you. Yeah, I've got the hat of working for Massey University and seeing what impact COVID-19 has had on the university. And then also in my sporting roles with rugby, you know, it's really hard to get any sympathy from people when we are probably one of the better off sporting organisations in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But because we bring in a large revenue, we also lose a lot in terms of not having the product to put out there for our sponsors and our commercial partners and for our broadcaster. So this has had a huge impact on our sport. So I've got the rugby hat, and then I'm on the Sport New Zealand board, and that's different again. Kereyn talked about being in the middle of a sandwich, and I feel that's what it's like in Sport New Zealand. We are trying to help the Minister of Sport and government, but also catering to our partners with MSOs and RSTs and those who are delivering community-based activities as well. So it's been really interesting being a part of both those organisations and seeing how they both respond. So within rugby, we've just been trying to deal with, first of all, the safety and the well-being of the people within rugby, and dealing with that crisis immediately. So that involved a lot of communicating, a lot of Zoom meetings, which I think was appreciated because everybody wanted to know what was going on. And now we're kind of moving into the what happens when we come out of level 4 and go into level 3. So I feel like it's shifting sands a lot of the time, and you come up with all these different scenarios. But for me, it's about remaining optimistic, as someone said, thinking about what is our purpose. And we see ourselves as kaitiaki, guardians of the sport of rugby, with my Rugby Board hat on, but with my Māori Rugby Board hat on in terms of looking out for those stakeholders in particular. And of course, being a woman, you can't help but think, and the only woman around the board table at the moment, what impact is this going to have on the women in our sport as well? We're definitely seeing ourselves as kaitiaki and the Sport New Zealand Board, and that's challenging in a different way because you can't have a direct impact on anything. You can kind of guide your partners and you can assist the government, but you don't have as much of a hands-on approach with some of the initiatives that you can implement. So yeah, it's been really interesting being involved in all those. The way I like to think of it is he waka e ki noa. We're all in this waka together. We are all going through this together. So what can we do to try and make it safe? Think about people's well-being, but also see how we can make sure that we can continue once we get to level 2 or level 1, if that's the case for rugby. What can we do to really, sorry to use a rugby analogy, but kickstart things again and first of all, get our communities involved. It's been interesting for me thinking about the performance versus the participation side of sport. So which one do you give more emphasis to during a situation like this? Of course, I mentioned the revenue side of things. So we're constantly thinking about how can we get more revenue so that we can keep the sport and sustain the sport. I also think we need to start thinking about rebuilding, not just recovery, but rebuilding. So this has given us an opportunity to think about what could we do differently. What are some of the things that have been kind of tradition or just the way we do things around here that maybe we need to challenge so that we can look into the future and think what can we do differently. And this has given us an opportunity to think that way. So kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. I thought that was an amazing introduction because it provides a really good context for some discussion about, and I like that refocus on rebuilding actually. Farah, you mentioned recovery, Fiona, but actually rebuilding essentially means that we can recreate and we don't have to just replicate what we've had historically. So the first question I have for all of you, but I'll ask Kereyn to answer first, is what does that rebuild look like? And I was thinking from an Olympic perspective in terms of the events that need to be organised for our athletes to qualify for the Olympics, and obviously that kind of twofold strategy that Farah highlighted, the professional versus the participation, and so what specific initiatives do we have to plan for, and what resources are going to be required from both government, and actually picking up on the issue about sponsors that Farah highlighted. Are there any sponsors left, or is this actually all going to be about voluntary labour and government in the short to medium term? So Kereyn.
Well, thank you, Louisa. That's a very wide-ranging question. So I'll pick a couple of little bits out of there, and just to say it's quite unnerving, and we would never have projected that. I can talk to colleagues all around the world, and they're all sitting in their homes doing what we're doing, and there's no sport being played aside from kids and mums and dads, you know, recreating, from the paddocks of New Zealand farming communities to the World Championships, the Olympics, you know, golf majors. The world has stopped. And the reality is that sports competition has stopped, and it's going to take some time to come back. But and it's really interesting too, because as well as our national federations here in New Zealand trying to think about their tasks, like Farah was talking about in rugby, so too are the international federations. So right now, World Athletics, World Sailing, their doors are shut, and they have furloughed their staff, and people are, being kind of engaged elsewhere. So it is a massively challenging scenario to think where we are today and how do we gear back up into, fully fledged, if I take the Olympic space for a moment, to the fact that our athletes are going to be competing against the best and the best of the world in 15 months' time. Just a couple of quick insights I have on this. I think that it's a really important opportunity for us to think about our competitive advantage. So I'm here more in the high performance space, Louisa, of what you mentioned, but right now, which is so unusual, all of our Olympic athletes are back in New Zealand. How do we use our motu, our training ground, and our people to bring our athletes back to life and to be better than before? And a couple of years ago, many of you will remember the challenges the Silver Ferns faced post Glasgow Commonwealth Games. And what they did is they re-zeroed on their New Zealand competition. They put in place a domestic competition, they created an environment and developed players, and they became world champions. Maybe we need to look at some examples of what type of insights do we have. How do we work with Australia to create some specific training opportunities, competition opportunities that we can manage and control in our part of the world? So maybe they're just a couple of little insights about, I see opportunities going forward where we're going to have to think a little bit differently. So I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Fiona?
I concur with Kereyn. We're in the same environment as the Olympic movement. We've got the International Paralympic Committee working with the international federations and the commercial partners at the global level. And that's replicated then with my colleagues at the National Paralympic level, and then working across our members at the national level. So I think in the immediate future, and it was touched on previously, that there is an opportunity for all sports to consider what they're doing, also why are they doing it, and also consider how they're doing it. So there may be opportunities that arise to do things differently than what we've previously done, to create new partnerships, to reprioritise our core business, and to conduct our activities and meetings differently. Just this morning, I held the Paralympics New Zealand AGM. I had 45 people on a Zoom call, and I have to say, it was the largest attendance ever. So I may just not go back to hosting an annual face-to-face meeting without the ability for attendees to connect electronically. And it's just a small example, I think, of how we will do things differently. If I focus on women in sport, the IWG Global Executive have just recently identified 5 areas of concern, specifically for women and girls due to COVID-19. It's just been released today from the IWG. The 5 concerns they have is well-being, safety, resource, leadership, and structure. So looking at the well-being, the physical and mental well-being of our girls and women who are currently in lockdown. And I really like the idea of not the recovery, but the rebuild. So what do we do to support the mental and well-being of girls and women? And also the safety. So looking at the emergence of wider social issues. So there's been widely documented increases in domestic violence globally, and economic impacts moving women and girls into poverty, and therefore lower participation rates in sport and physical activity. So I think there's a real opportunity to look at how we're advocating for and supporting on wider social issues across sport. The possibility that money and resource may be taken out of women's sport and physical activity is possibly quite real, to support men's sport and physical activity. So I think there's a real opportunity for organisations to look at their resource and prioritise accordingly, and really being equitable in their resourcing, and really looking at Kereyn spoke about the values, but the values of the organisation. And also the opportunity to to drive stronger diversity at the board table in sport and physical activity. Organisations at this point on a short term might revert back to the old ways just out of comfort, and so I think there's an opportunity for sport in New Zealand to keep those quotas, the idea of having females and the diversity around the boardroom as key discussion points as organisations are finding out what is their new way of doing business, and not only recover but rebuild their business.
Thank you. Farah?
Yeah, I haven't seen that report, so I was just writing down furiously some of the points you were raising, because I do agree with you around what impact will this have on women in sport, and I'm actually very concerned that it will be a reason to perhaps not put so much resource into the women's sport or game, because it's not seen as revenue generating, and that is the main argument that's being used a lot. So I think we need to come back and think about some of the reasons why we should support women's sport or girls in sport, because often, you know, think about in times of crisis and around the world wars, for instance, women were playing sport because they were passionate about it and passionate about their communities. So I think we need to keep valuing women in our sporting arenas, because they will be the ones that will help with the rebuild and help with the recovery. And I don't know about you, but I feel like once we do kind of get out of level one, people will be running out there and wanting to play sport and wanting to get involved. So I think it's important that we think about the role of women when that comes along. But it is something that as a woman on a board, I'm conscious of the whole time. You know, I'm there to be a kaitiaki for the whole game, but I'm also conscious about what that means for women and what that means for Māori and what that means for diversity and inclusion. You know, are those things going to be put on the back burner because that's not helping with our core business of playing rugby? So it's great when I see things like Isolation Nation, which is something that rugby's trying to do for Sky to provide some product. And watching my children who are 7 and 10 and are currently fighting outside the door there, which is why I had to turn the video off. But they sit there mesmerised by Isolation Nation. It's like that TikTok generation, and they're learning about the players and seeing some of the backstories of some of these players that perhaps we haven't really seen that side of them. So I do think it's something that we should keep front of mind and challenge the whole way. What does this mean for the longevity and the survival and the thriving of women's sport?
Thank you. Kind of moving on to the opportunity part for women and girls, and just to provide some context for Kereyn's initial korero in this space, it was as a member of Women in Sport Aotearoa, and I want to acknowledge that organisation. I'm a board member, so I should disclose that, but also that international working group of women in sport. It's kind of now led me to, I guess, opportunities for us as women to all come together and be really clear, for example, that the diversity of our governance boards is incredibly important, and obviously Sport New Zealand has been leading that far, and it's one of the agenda items that we don't want to see lost. And then picking up on something you've just talked about, Farah, in terms of Sky and the partnership and the Isolation Nation, which actually is about showcasing our athletes and how resilient and motivated they continue to be. And it is that difference between recovering to what we had before versus rebuilding. So I guess if we look at those opportunities, for example, is this, you know, what can happen out of this for women and girls? And actually I'm going to go to you first, Farah, and I'm thinking specifically then about if New Zealand and Australia become, we're able to travel to our countries, is this the right time to start up a women's rugby competition, for example? And the same with rugby league and, you know, a whole lot of other codes and sports. Is this the time? And to put that at the front of providing content to organisations like Sky, and also to Television New Zealand. I don't know why we can't put those matches on, you know, New Zealand on those publicly funded platforms. But to provide the content that everyone is so desperately craving. So that's my tono to you, actually, Farah.
Yeah, it is definitely something that we've been talking about, and I do think, you know, once if the borders open, we are looking at what relationships we can form with Australia, because especially with the Rugby World Cup, which is still scheduled for next year, potentially just off the back of the Olympics. So that might be a great opportunity to showcase our top female rugby players, or just top rugby players who happen to be female. So, you know, it's about how can we use that, and everybody will probably be wanting something to celebrate. So that is a huge opportunity. So we are looking at what can we do to make sure that the Black Ferns are in the right frame to really showcase at that event. So yeah, we're looking at that. We're looking at, you know, can we afford to put on a provincial competition for the men and the women, or do we need to make decisions? So those discussions are going on now. Sky have been really great in terms of the broadcasting deal, that they are really supportive of Māori rugby and women's rugby. So we're having discussions with them all the time as well. And Sport New Zealand is still very much committed to the women and girls in sport and recreation strategy. And we have had a few people say, do we still have to try and reach that 40% target of women on governing boards? And yes, we are. And New Zealand Rugby's got our AGM coming up at the end of April, and we're going to be doing it by Zoom. So that will be really interesting, but we are still seeing some changes there in terms of getting more women involved in leadership roles. So yeah, definitely front of our mind, Louisa, and definitely having people like yourself and all of the women that we have in these roles, kind of making sure that we push that along.
So, Fiona, would you like to contribute to that question?
It's been really great to see the leadership from Sport New Zealand with the Women and Girls strategy and the work of which Whisper to do in New Zealand to build momentum on that for the importance of participation of women and girls. And likewise in Sport NZ, there's also the development of the disability plan as well. So I think as organisations, as sport organisations are looking at opportunities, then it does give an opportunity to reassess as to what matters to them and what they're doing to best create greater participation within their code. So hopefully there's an opportunity for them, if they haven't already, to consider around greater participation of women and girls, and in the context of Paralympics New Zealand, of disabled people across the sports system. I think it does provide an opportunity for sports organisations to redevelop their current ways of working. There was very much a mentality of, boom, it was so fast and it was all go, go, go. And it's given the sports sector, as everyone, the opportunity to take a step back and to reassess as to what's really important and what are the building blocks that need to be in place to create that activity, including equitable activity for female participants and disabled participants. What I've really enjoyed seeing is that I think the pandemic has really highlighted examples of the value of female leadership through these difficult times, and we're really blessed in New Zealand with having a Prime Minister that is world leading through her authenticity and empathy that she has with the nation. And I wonder how we can hopefully build that in to a model for sport leadership and for sport to see the value of female leadership through crises and then through non-crisis as well. So an opportunity for the positive impact of that diversity, thought and experience in helping organisations successfully face this challenge and redesign the future of their organisation with women and female leaders at the forefront of their minds.
Kereyn?
Yeah, gosh, I agree with what everything Farah and Fiona have said, and maybe just a couple of things to add, and that is that it's my hope and opportunity that as new structures emerge in communities in particular, we will see a bit of a breakdown in some of the patriarchal old hierarchical, somewhat irrelevant types of operations, and see the emergence of new inclusive community structures and cooperative structures. And I think women have a central role to play there, and that's a massive opportunity. I can see women, and I reflect on the sport of netball particularly because it's something I've been involved with all my life, but you could say the same for any sport, is women have been at the heart of volunteer community everywhere. We probably all grew up in rural communities. I know you did, Louisa and Farah. Rural communities where the women were the backbone of the volunteer effort, and they will continue to be so, and they always have been and always will be. And I think that women leadership at the community level will be a very, very important part of a rebuild, and hopefully with a new culture. The other thing I'd say is let's not lose the opportunity for continuing the momentum and actually turning some things around. So I'd look at something like Class 4 gaming in the community. And by way of my understanding, I think Class 4 gaming over a year contributes something like 150 million to sports and community clubs throughout New Zealand. Now, I hasten to guess, but I'd probably say 80% of that goes to male clubs, male-dominated sports and activities and clubs. Well, why don't we change that? In a new rebuild model, why is it not equitable? And let's not lose the opportunity to rally our voice and advocate for things that will make a fundamental difference. And just finally from me, if I go to the other end of the spectrum and I look at our amazing wahine that are showcasing the strength and the power of sport as role models for young people. And we've all seen them, and we look at our teams, we look at the Black Ferns, the Silver Ferns, the Football Ferns. Many of our teams, they are now well established and they are role models for boys and girls. And I think we're starting to now come into a community and a generation where people have seen women and girls achieve, and be leaders. And so I don't want us to lose that momentum. So we've got to keep fighting the fight, but also use those opportunities to support those people, to showcase the success and to keep building on the progress that we've made.
So Kereyn, just picking up on the point that you've raised about rebuilding in the Class 4 gaming scenario, I mean, that actually is a critical scenario, and some of us have been trying to find out from Internal Affairs for a few years now what the actual gender spend is in that area. But given that it's been nothing and it's going to become something, you're right. Having people like yourself who are willing to be involved in, I guess, developing strategies around how we make that happen is critical. And so I'm now looking at how we can kind of all work together to brainstorm all these ideas to then put them into a strategy. I know that Sport New Zealand will be doing that, but is that something you actually think Global Women should be leading, or in conjunction with Women in Sport Aotearoa, or you as the CEO of the Olympic Committee? Or so I guess this is really now about how we create and set goals and aspirations for women and girls in sport, and what is that pathway forward, and all of us contributing to, I think there's an amazing opportunity to rebuild a sporting landscape that we can actually be at least equitable in as women and girls.
Yeah.
So I'll start with you, Kereyn, please.
Well, that's quite a big mission, isn't it? I think we all need to play our part and step up. And I think with the female leadership we've got across sport in so many settings now, and within the political sphere, and we've been given license now to move things forward. So we've got to step forward. So my thoughts about this, I think IWG and Whisper, Women in Sport Aotearoa, are a central part of this. And I think building alliances with Global Women is a massive opportunity. And, realise I don't think we've explored that potential enough in the past. And so personally, I think that would be a really cool alliance. And also think about what are the really critical points of influence. Where do we need to put our energy to create the most change? And I would use something like policy on Class 4 gaming as an area we should invest time and effort in, because it has, you know, a significant return. And it is interesting that so much of sport is funded from gaming. So it's either really lotteries or TAB or Class 4, or at the other end, but usually sponsorship and broadcasting. So it's really turning our mind to those things. And I think working with Global Women also to think, how do we bring the IWG conference in New Zealand into something that showcases and provides a platform for us to showcase our pride and our performance internationally, but also to accelerate change domestically.
Farah?
I don't know if I'm going to answer the question. I might have gone off track a little bit because I can see all the notes in the chat box and the questions as well. So I've been furiously thinking of a response to them. But look, I think funding of sport in the future will have to look at the change, and you know, even looking at more of a user pays system. If we're not going to rely heavily on the likes of the TAB or Lotto or Class 4, you know, where else can we get it from? And unless we can convince commercial partners to come on board as sponsors, we're always going to have to really push and prove that we are growing an audience for women's sport. The other day at a Global Women's event in Wellington, I asked the question, how many of you have been to an All Blacks game? And quite a few put their hand up and said, how many of you have been to a Blackburns game? And there weren't that many. So, you know, I think we need to encourage people to support the women's sport in whatever form. That you don't have to all be rugby fans, but if there's something else you're interested in, think about what you can do to try and support the female version of that game. Someone else mentioned around media coverage, and I think we're getting better at that. One of the key priorities for the Women and Girls in Sport and Recreation strategy is value and visibility. So we are working closely with the media and with researchers to find out exactly what is that coverage like, what's the quality and the quantity of the coverage like. We've got things like the Locker Room, which is supported by Sky Sport and Whisper. You know, they are doing a great job of some really good journalism that is not so much about what the women look like or who they're partnered with, but more about their actual performance and their athleticism and what they're doing. So I think we're getting there. We still need to monitor that and keep on top of it, because, as I said, things like COVID-19 could be a reason to just drop it. But if we keep pushing for that and keep that front and centre of their minds as an opportunity and of growing an audience, I think we can continue to make some movement forward.
Thank you. I was just thinking that we have Isolation Nation, which is pretty rugby specific, but if we had a women's version on Sky, it would be called Inspiration Nation. And we've actually had a question from Jill Simpson, and I'll read it to you. It just said, it is so important for young people to have role models in sport so that hopes and aspirations are preserved, which in turn preserves community grassroots sport and a pipeline to the elite and professional. What new opportunities are there in this space? I've kind of just noted one myself. And my caveat has always been, when I made the Silver Ferns when I was 17, people would say, how did you make the Silver Ferns? And actually I could, because where I grew up, I could play netball. So if I didn't have an opportunity to play netball, I never would have got to represent our country. And that really is the point of it all. And that is the connection between participation and professionalism. So Fiona, what do you think about this, opportunities for providing opportunities for our women's role models to be profiled better?
If I liken it to my experience in Paralympic sport, you know, 10 years ago, it would be very difficult for a New Zealander to name a para-athlete in sport. And so as an organisation, we have looked at how we increase the portrayal of our para-athletes across the community and position our para-athletes as elite athletes within the media and doing a lot of work in that space. So I think in response to your question, I can often, and I often joke with Whisper and the Women and Girls strategy, that I could often just replace all with disabled people and take on the strategy, because we're often working in a very similar realm. And we've got to look at ways of utilising inspiring women and girls at both the grassroots area, and listen to their concerns, their difficulties and their barriers, and look at breaking down some of those for them, so that we can have an equitable society for everyone, whether you're a girl, whether you have a disability, or whether you're married, or whether you just come to New Zealand as a refugee. So creating a society whereby everyone is afforded the same abilities to participate, but have, importantly, those role models that they can see in society and desire that they want to be like. There's many of an example. I think a 13-year-old Nikita Howarth, Sarah Ulmer came and presented to her when she was in primary school. And from that day onwards, she wanted to be an Olympian. Well, she wasn't an Olympian, but she became a Paralympian. But just the whole idea of seeing the opportunities that women have and hearing their stories, seeing their stories, I think is of utmost importance. And I can only explain that through the experience that I've seen with disabled people, and increasing the profile of disability sport through parasport in New Zealand.
Kereyn or Farah, anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, only I'd say that I think we've got to make sure in advocating and influencing and empowering organisations that they are themselves, sports organisations and organisations like Fiona's and ourselves, that we are telling the female story and the male story, that we are promoting athletes, and that we're thinking about the values and the inspiration behind that, and how is it relatable to New Zealanders. I think it's not only a media responsibility, it is a media responsibility, but it's also our own responsibility to embrace the power of social media. And women, I understand, on our channels are far more engaged. More women follow our social media channels than males, probably because they get what they want. But you know, there's ways to connect to people, and this COVID, if it's taught us anything, it's that we can do this, that we can put people in different forums and create opportunities to connect with the young New Zealanders. And we're doing that with Olympians now, rather than having them go around schools, which they would normally do. We're doing sessions on, on Facebook and other digital forums where young people can ask them questions and connect. So I think we've got to just try and encourage people to be more proactive.
Farah?
Yeah, I agree. I think we can still do that. It might not be running around on a field or a court, or doing what you can to demonstrate your excellence at the Olympics or the Paralympics, but I do think we can do it in other ways. As I said, that the Isolation Nation has provided an insight into their background, and that can be more inspiring. So if anyone can connect with some part of their story and think, well, if they can do it, I can do it too, then that's wonderful. So that doesn't mean we all won't be amping to get out there. I'm sure everybody has been creative in terms of how they're trying to keep physically active and have that well-being element and balance in their lives. And I've never been a believer that I want to be like somebody, but I do find other people's stories really inspiring. So I think we have found different ways to do that.
So we've had a few questions about the media and the importance of women journalists. There's also a question here about just highlighting women coaching, practicing, and maybe locker room can expand. But just picking up on what you said before, Kereyn, I mean, we look at Sky and we look at TV1, but actually maybe through social media and Facebook, we could easily be telling our own stories. And actually, I'm not sure if people know, but Nadia Lim is the most influential person in New Zealand society at the moment, and she did that with her husband and on her phone. That's how she filmed her whole series that we all now watch every day to look at how she cooks this amazing food that she does. So I guess who coordinates that? Who is going to lead that? Is that something that, you know, each of our Olympic organisations will lead in terms of telling those inspirational stories? Yeah, I think that is really the media question now. How can we better support Locker Room is the other question, I suppose, because they do have very dedicated women journalists who are producing amazing content for us.
And I think their link up with Sky is very positive. And I mean, one of the first place to start is to help support our female journalists, many of whom are doing an outstanding job. And I know they have their own group called W Group, which they share, and they have mentors, and they're creating a sort of pipeline of journalists as well. And, you know, Mel Robinson's leading that. She's doing a great job. She's connecting with Whisper. They're connecting, you know, with IWG. I think if we all play our part and we see how we could step up, and it's not about telling just the Olympian story, for example. It's exactly what you said, Farah. It's just to know that our people who go on to represent us on the world stage, they come from our communities. They're just like us. They're not exceptional people. They're just incredibly talented and motivated with the right support and values and guidance. And their stories are inspirational if we tell them properly. So coming to your question, Louisa, I think it's about us working collectively and individually and with determination, and actually in a way that's relevant to the people we want to inspire. So it is about young people who are highly connected, highly social and highly digital. So that's our challenge and opportunity, I think.
Fiona?
And doing it in a way that reaches those audiences at a time that they can see that and want it. So what I've learned about the young people is they operate in a very different way to the way in which on Facebook will be gone now, right? I probably just, probably the young people won't even use Facebook or Instagram, etc. So populating various sites that do actually reach those young audiences is of utmost importance. And we just never know, do we, around the importance of what a young person may hear or see and the impact that might have in their life forever, just by seeing one or hearing something or seeing something. And I think that's the great opportunity that we have through sport, is to be sharing those messages throughout this time, but also in the future, to all young people, and the importance of sport to create a nicer environment and a better New Zealand to live in.
Thank you, Fiona. Now, Farah, I've got a specific question for you, and it's the last one before I invite you all to make concluding comments. And it is about the 40% female representation on boards. And I guess the challenge is, you've noted that the AGM is coming up. How long do you think it's going to take New Zealand Rugby to meet that aspiration?
If you'd asked me that a year ago, I would have said, oh, we'll be struggling. But actually, our chair made an announcement at one of the provincial union CEO and chairs forums about a year ago, saying